It's mid-January, and for me, it's time to prune my climbing rose. I went to a rose pruning workshop offered by my local Rose Society this year, and I learned a ton at this workshop last year, so I decided it would be a good idea to get a refresher this year. So today I'm going to try and share the steps I went through on how to care for a climbing rose on an arbor, because that's what I specifically went to the workshop to learn about. My supplies include a pop-up bag for debris, scissors to cut the ties off the arbor, leather garden gloves to protect my hands from the thorns, hand pruners, and a kneeling pad. And I don't have it here, but a pair of loppers to remove the large canes. So their first step is to remove all the leaves from the plant so you can see the structure of your canes. You also need to make sure you do your best to clean up all the leaves off the ground because they can harbor disease and make your rose sick. So this year, rather than doing this all in one go like I did last year, I did it little by little over several weeks. My guess is in total it took me 4 or 5 hours to clear the foliage, and that was about what it took last year. Once you've done that, your next step is to remove all the ties you use to attach the canes to the arbor. This is because you have to manually attach roses to your trellis or arbor because they don't actually climb on their own. When I was at the workshop, they advised against weaving canes in and out of the arbor for 2 reasons. First, it can damage the canes and you end up with the canes getting sick. And second, it can make it more difficult to prune. By keeping your canes on the outside of the arbor, it allows them to, once you cut them off, to flop over, and it doesn't require a ladder because you can stand on the ground and decide which canes you want to work with and what canes to clean up. At the workshop, they talked about the number of canes that should come from the base of your plant. This rose has at least 10 coming from it, but the master rosarians suggested limiting the number of canes from the base of the plant to 8 to 5 canes. So I'm going to make my best effort to remove a bunch of canes today, but this is going to be so hard. Before you start pruning, you need to sanitize your pruners. I use 91% rubbing alcohol, but at the workshop they used Lysol, which I hadn't seen before. So that's another option if you don't want to use rubbing alcohol because it's technically not the best for your pruners. The next step is to remove dead, dying, or diseased canes. Look for things like canker, bore holes, or any large wounds on the cane and remove them. They also suggested getting rid of older, ugly canes and twiggy, non-productive growth, partly just for visual reasons and partly just to make sure the plant stays healthy and vigorous. Next, you need to start pruning. I spent a ton of time last year stressing about every cut, where to put things, but I have to keep reminding myself that roses are very forgiving, and so if I make any mistakes, it will recover. The last thing they shared both this year and last year was that you no longer need to do angled cuts. That was kind of old school, and that you can just do a straight cut on your limbs. It creates a smaller wound. Next, at the workshop, they explained the differences between vertical and horizontal canes. Vertical canes, also called main canes, grow up and over your arbor but don't produce roses. It is instead the lateral or horizontal canes that form your flowers. So that means when you prune your lateral growth, you have 2 options. You can snake the canes up the side of the arbor, which creates the lateral growing position for the flowers, or they suggest cutting back any canes, lateral canes, to 2 to 5 inches. Either will promote new growth and flowers, and I've used a combination in the past and plan to use a combination again. Because I live in a mild climate, my rose is already pushing growth, which means it's going to be really hard to remove canes because I'm just going to be thinking about wanting beautiful roses and tons of color on the plant. I will try and show you a few pictures of the last couple of years. Last year was gorgeous, and I did that I got that after my prune and doing the S pattern, whereas the prior year, which I didn't know about the S pattern in the latter canes, there were big empty sections in the plant. One of the other questions I asked was about the thickness of the branches. Like, how do I know which ones to remove? And they explained that the branching never actually gets thicker, it'll just get longer. So if it's super weak, you don't want to keep tiny branches that are weak. All right, now it's time to actually get in and start pruning this rose. I have to decide what I'm going to keep and what I'm going to get rid of. This is going to be so hard. Wish me luck. So the first thing I'm looking for is for branching that didn't put on a lot of growth. This is maybe 3 feet, 2 feet long. And for a full year of growth, that's pretty small, and it's also a pretty spindly size. It is not even a pencil width in size, so I'm cutting off things that look like this. Kind of the easiest decisions first, as far as I'm concerned. You want to remove brown spots like this because this is a dieback, most likely due to something called canker, which is a fungus that gets into the rose, and you want to keep it from moving down the rose. Here's another really good example where it's been moving down the cane and into the plant. So I've been going in and cutting this type of stuff off. So I kept branches like this one that are still pretty flexible, so I could create the lateral branching that will form the buds. I've been out here for a couple hours now and have made a little bit of progress. I've cut out some larger canes, so there aren't quite as many in the bottom, but there's still a lot. And I kind of cleaned up the inside of the arbor now and have pushed some of these canes to be lateral so that these buds can produce flowers. I still have a lot to do, but I also have several other things to do before going to work tomorrow. So I'm going to have to stop here and pick this back up next weekend. I am back outside to finish the pruning and placement of all the canes from this pretty in pink Eden rose. And one of the things I am trying to be very focused on is reducing the number of canes here at the base of the plant. So what I'm going to look for is anything that is thin and spindly. One of the ones I identified was this cane right here. It's pretty thin compared to some of these other canes, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this one out. So that is what I'm going to focus on right now, is getting rid of everything that looks too small and thin. This is the pile of canes that I took off of the rose, and this is the final look. I used a combination of methods that I saw used in various online pruning videos. The things I learned in the clinics done by the local Rose Society and the Master Rosarians. You can see here that I kind of wrapped canes around in a S-shaped pattern. When I trimmed them at a downward facing bud, just above a downward facing bud, because that was what the Master Rosarian said to do. I also placed several canes along the top. So I have several canes that kind of go down to the first rung. I don't know if he'll go any further. I did look up this rose and it's only supposed to get about 12 feet. So this might be close to its maximum size. And that does it for my rose pruning. I hope you learned something. I know I did. I also was terrified the entire time. I know roses are forgiving, but it still scares me every time I have to do this because I really want to see beautiful roses and I would hate to lose out on a beautiful show in the spring. Thank you for joining me for my garden journey.